everybody. I want to share with you basically what happens after you study. So what happens after you have these ideas, and what can you do with them as alumni of 100,000 Strong. My wife and I, Angie and I, had decided to move. At the end of 2003, we had just heard this drum beat. Part of it was SARS, honestly, but we heard this drum beat, all this excitement about China, and we were crazy enough to try it, and we moved to Shanghai, which looked a bit like that. Doesn't quite have as many bicycles anymore. And I joined this company, SMIC, Semiconductor Foundry. So Deloitte, I think, was a big friend of SMIC, especially through our IPO. $3 billion of private equity and IPO, and 3 years later, I left SMIC and I started, shortly thereafter, my first foray into social enterprise, Qifeng. And Qifeng is a peer-to-peer social lending platform, or P2P lending platform, where Chinese students can borrow for the money they need for college. So basically, they use this service. Individual students who need money for school connect to individuals throughout China. Maybe 5, 10, 15 different individuals would lend anything from 50 to 100, a couple hundred renminbi, and put the funds together, enough for school for that year. We also connect with the school to make sure the student's identity, the use of funds are all verified, and kind of facilitate the transaction. And so through that experience, those 4 years of building that company, as well as other entrepreneurial experiences here, I, of course, encountered some pretty significant challenges. Of course, the first for that model was uncertainty. So an innovative new business model in a potentially sensitive area, a couple of sensitive areas actually, education and financial services. But over the years, what we realized and what became more certain, more clear, these colors have changed. But what started out in this kind of unregulated area, what we generously in the Chinese community call gray areas, is where innovation often happens, because the laws, the regulations, don't predict that P2P lending actually would make financial sense. And so in that way, actually, China is an open place where things like that can happen in these unlegal spaces, I call it. And then over time, in deliberation with stakeholders, often the government, with regulators, other institutions, you become more aware of what policy priorities are, policy then is aligned, and over time then regulations come out afterwards that kind of fit the de facto model of what is actually built and successful in the market. So that gave us a lot of comfort. Looking at this path for third-party payments and online video made us feel much more comfortable about this regulatory uncertainty. Another challenge, of course, is communication. I just tried to explain to you in 3 sentences what Qifeng does, and I'm sure many of you maybe will have lots of questions. In that way, when we were trying to explain this new business model, these new ideas, we had a great challenge of trying to explain this new way of doing things. And as well, we had to also explain how we were looking at building a for-profit company that actually embedded positive social impact at the same time. What now is more commonly called a social enterprise or a social venture. In Chinese, the 社会企业. And so for us, we had the kind of triple challenge of explaining that we're doing something new and innovative. We're not just copying something. We are trying to build a for-profit company and have social impact. And over time, we developed this more familiar use of kind of social innovation to describe what we're doing. And that led to phenomenal success, along with our hard work and the team, tons of recognition, great relationships with institutions, and the success that has thankfully made it possible for me to move on. And so, what are some lessons learned from this adventure these past almost 8 years in China? The first, of course, is about great people, working with great people with very different backgrounds, different ideas, different talents. And in part, pulling together a team of talented Chinese entrepreneurs, I would say, required this kind of bridge building and understanding the risk profile for Chinese startup people. It's not quite so easy as for young Americans. For instance, the risk picture is very complex, where your career risk, if your startup fails, and most big companies don't recognize or appreciate your startup experience in kind of your resume. And of course, obviously, the social capital that you risk working for a company that nobody's ever heard of, much less maybe customers don't care for. And obviously the financial risk. One-child families, like one child, having to worry about taking care of 2 parents and 4 grandparents in a country with a very weak social safety net. And what's more, the cultural norm of having to buy what is, in first-tier cities, a very expensive home before you can date seriously, before you can get married. So it's a tremendous amount of risk. But what I would say is that understanding that risk, being able to share with your team, think about ways to mitigate those risks, and most importantly, to build something with purpose. So our company was driven by a mission, a singular mission, to give everyone in China a way to pay for their education. And so for us, when times are dark, as they are in every startup, we're worried about making payroll, worried about getting that next feature out, and people working hard in the sprint. Well, we were compelled by the individual stories, the student by students that we could affect, and the lives that would be transformed by our service. So another valuable lesson, besides that, is asking for directions. So, Angie out on the street asking for directions, of course, but listening to the market, listening to users, not just to mentors, experts, and your investors, but actually letting the market define what the product should be is a valuable element of achieving something real too. And then lastly, the big point I'd like to make is around collaboration. And so for most startups, what I think is really healthy and what's been very fruitful for my multiple startup experiences here is this sort of direction of moving from the early days when you're testing something's technical feasibility and you have really strong technical capabilities, and then maybe you can build the first thing and it exists. So then it's essentially a work of art that's non-transferable, right? Then you move into making it desirable. So from feasible to desirable, you bring design talent. You make it something that can be shared by maybe a small number of people. It's something that's collectible. And then ultimately, if you can combine and collaborate with people who bring marketing and business expertise as well, you take what's first feasible, then desirable, and you make it viable. So economically viable. And that's when you have a real product that can affect thousands or millions of lives. And so the message from all of these points and from my journey, I think, is about mix, about combining, about crossing ideas, about crossing distances that separate. It's about thinking about how, the techniques that you need to build a company, but also thinking about why you're building that company, what the product or service is for. It's about thinking about market opportunities, trying to solve customer needs, trying to solve social needs in our society, but also embracing the responsibility that with the talent and the resources we've been given, with parents who have prodded us and given us certain advantages, we can accept and embrace the responsibility to actually make a difference. And of course, most importantly for Project Pengyou and all of us pioneers, is thinking about combining of the talents and the creativity, the energy between China and the US. And so just lastly, another question besides how and why is when. And so, it's been recently said, Li Kai-fu most famously, that China's not ready for innovation, that all China can do is micro-innovation, copying other models to China. And I would fiercely disagree. I think that China is ready for innovation. China innovates. And I would say that what's more, we need China to innovate. Because as we've heard throughout the evening, that the issues that face China are issues that then therefore have an impact on the whole world. And so I would ask all of us to embrace those challenges and make the world full of other pioneers. And I have a personal stake in this as well. So I've got 2 Xiaopengyu at home. And I'd love for them to see that it is possible for us to mix, to build bridges, to make these unique combinations where people like us pioneers can animate change and actually not just have purpose in what we do, but do it well and really affect massive impact. Thanks.